You broke into my house looking for a victim. You found the wrong house.
The front door of 14 Briarwood Lane didn't just open that night. It exploded inward, the deadbolt tearing clean through the wooden frame with a sound like a rifle shot, splinters of painted oak spraying across the hardwood floor in the darkness beyond. Officer Dale Pruitt was already moving through the threshold before the door finished swinging his service weapon up and sweeping his tactical flashlight, cutting wild white arcs through the black interior of the house, his voice filling the room at full volume. "Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Show me your hands right now!" The words blurring together into a single aggressive wall of sound that Pruitt had used 100 times before to make people crumble. The man standing in the center of the living room did not crumble. He was broad-shouldered, dressed in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, his hands already raised to shoulder height, palms open, facing outward, and his face caught in the sweeping beam of the flashlight was completely, almost unnervingly calm. Not frozen, not trembling, not calculating an escape. Just still. The way a mountain is still. The way something is still when it has absolutely nothing to prove and nowhere it needs to run. Pruitt closed the distance fast the way he always did, weapon advancing toward the man's face, a tactic designed to break composure to trigger submission through proximity and threat. And in the next 1.7 seconds, everything in the room changed in a way that Officer Dale Pruitt's brain would spend the next 18 years trying to process. He was on the floor. He didn't fully understand how he'd gotten there. His weapon was gone from his hand, and the man in the gray t-shirt was standing calmly above him, the Glock field-stripped and cleared in a single practiced motion, the magazine resting separately on a cardboard moving box. The chambered round caught cleanly out of the air. Pruitt was looking at the ceiling. His ribs ached. His wrist was screaming. The man hadn't thrown a single punch. What Officer Dale Pruitt did not know what would take the next several months to fully reveal itself in courtrooms and federal offices, and a deposition room that would make Pruitt's skin go cold, was that the man standing above him in that dark living room was not a burglar, not a trespasser, not anything close to the threat Pruitt had invented on the drive over. He was the most precisely dangerous human being Dale Pruitt had ever been in a room with, and Pruitt had just handed him every weapon he would ever need. To understand how this night came to be, we have to go back to where it always starts with a phone call made out of fear and the kind of ignorance that believes itself to be civic duty. Carolyn Marsh had lived at 17 Briarwood Lane for 26 years, and in those 26 years, she had come to think of the street as something she was personally responsible for, not in any official capacity. Nothing she could point to on paper, but in the way that certain people come to believe that the version of the world they are comfortable with is the version the world is supposed to be. She was 63 years old, a widow, a retired school administrator, and the self-appointed coordinator of the Sycamore Ridge Watch, a neighborhood group chat that dealt primarily in forwarded HOA newsletters, photographs of suspicious vehicles that turned out to belong to housekeepers and landscapers, and the low-grade collective anxiety of people who had paid a significant amount of money to live near other people who looked exactly like them. The house at 14 Briarwood Lane had been sitting vacant for 7 weeks since the foreclosure sign went up. The Miller family, a quiet couple in their 60s who had owned the property for 30 years, had lost it in a medical debt spiral that the neighborhood had collectively agreed not to discuss too loudly. Carolyn had watched the foreclosure process with a specific kind of vigilance. She had called the listing real estate agent twice. The agent had told her only that the property had sold and that the buyer intended to move in personally. The agent had not told her who the buyer was, no matter how Carolyn had phrased the question. It was 11:48 on a Tuesday night when Carolyn, who had not been able to sleep, was standing in her darkened living room with a glass of water looking out the front window at the quiet street, when she saw a tall black man in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants come up the driveway of number 14, carrying a large military-style duffel bag over one shoulder. She watched him walk to the front door. She watched him reach into his pocket, produce a key, unlock the door, step inside, and close it behind him. That was everything she saw. That was all of it. But before she dialed 911, Carolyn opened the Sycamore Ridge Watch group chat and typed, "They finally sold the Miller place. You won't believe who moved in. I'm calling it in right now." 14 minutes later, she told a 911 dispatcher that she had witnessed a large man force his way into the vacant property across the street, that he was carrying what appeared to be a heavy bag that could contain weapons or stolen goods, that he was very large and had moved aggressively, and that she was genuinely afraid for the safety of the neighborhood. She had not witnessed a forced entry. She had not seen a weapon. She had not seen aggression of any kind. The dispatcher logged the call as an armed burglary in progress with a possibly dangerous suspect and relayed it immediately to the nearest available unit. 2 miles away, Officer Dale Pruitt heard the words "large black male possibly armed" come through his radio, and something behind his eyes went bright. Marcus Webb had closed on the house at 14 Briarwood Lane 4 days before that Tuesday night, and this was the first evening he had actually spent inside it, surrounded by cardboard boxes. A camping chair he had brought from the trunk of his car, a bottle of Knob Creek bourbon, and a silence so complete that he could hear the refrigerator hum from 2 rooms away. He was 44 years old. He had spent 22 years in the United States Army, the last 13 of them as an operator, and then a commander in the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, Delta, an organization most people had never heard of and almost no one talked about, officially known informally as Delta Force, the Tier 1 counterterrorism unit that handled the missions that other special operations units didn't train for. He had 2 silver stars, a bronze star with valor, device a classified presidential unit citation he could not discuss in public, and a body that carried the accumulated damage of 2 decades of work in places that did not appear on most Americans' mental maps of the world. Kandahar, Mosul, the Horn of Africa locations with no names that would ever appear in a press release. He had recently retired at the rank of Master Warrant Officer. 5 declined 3 separate contractor positions that would have paid him more money than he knew what to do with, and bought a house in Clover County, Virginia, with the singular ambition of sitting in a quiet room and hearing nothing require his immediate attention. In the duffel bag beside his camping chair were 2 changes of clothes, his service medals in a protective case, and a folded American flag, the flag from the funeral of Sergeant First Class Leon Price, his closest friend from 2 deployments, who had died in a vehicle accident stateside 3 years ago in circumstances that had absolutely nothing to do with combat and everything to do with a drunk driver running a red light on a Wednesday afternoon. Marcus was sitting in the camping chair in the dark. He hadn't bothered to find which box contained his lamp, turning a glass of bourbon slowly in his hands and listening to the refrigerator and the crickets and the general profound quiet of a suburb at midnight, when something changed in the texture of the silence outside. His resting heart rate stayed at 57 beats per minute. It did not spike. The response was not panic, it was registration. Clean and immediate, the way a smoke detector registers smoke without experiencing fear. Synthetic fabric moving against a utility belt. The compressed crunch of boots on decorative gravel weight distributed forward 2 sets of footfalls clustering too close together, a stacking formation practiced by people who had seen it in training videos but had never had to use it against anyone who knew what a stacking formation was. No announcement. No perimeter established on the side or rear of the house. No spotlight from a cruiser. Marcus set his bourbon glass down on top of the nearest cardboard box without making a sound. He stood up from the camping chair and he moved into the shadows at the far edge of the living room, positioning himself at a 45-degree angle from the door in the exact blind spot of anyone who would come through it. His heart rate stayed at 57. He was already calculating. The cruiser rolled down Sycamore Ridge Drive with its lights dark and its engine barely above idle, the way Dale Pruitt liked to approach when he had already decided what he was going to find on the other end, which was most of the time, if you asked the 19 people who had filed use of force complaints against him over his 14 years with the Clover County Sheriff's Department. Pruitt was 46 years old, and he looked it in a specific way. The kind of way where the years hadn't softened anything, but had instead concentrated it a thick neck that sat on broader shoulders than the uniform was tailored to accommodate a jaw set at a permanent angle, somewhere between a smirk and a challenge, hands that rested habitually near his utility belt, even when there was no conceivable reason for them to be there. He had the bearing of a man who had decided early in his career that authority was something you wore, not something you earned, and had spent 14 years making everyone around him pretend they couldn't see the difference. 19 complaints. That was the number. Excessive force, unlawful detention, intimidation, filing of inaccurate incident reports across 14 years in one department. 19 people had taken the significant personal risk of formally complaining about Dale Pruitt, and every single one of those complaints had been reviewed, assessed, and cleared by an internal review board that Captain Roy Stills had been quietly stacking with Pruitt-friendly personnel for over a decade. Stills liked Pruitt's numbers. High arrest rates made the department look good in annual reports. The complaints were a paperwork problem, not a people problem that was Stills's operating philosophy, and he had enforced it with the consistency of a man who knew which filing cabinet to use. Sitting in the passenger seat, gripping the door handle, with the unconscious tension of someone who had been riding with Dale Pruitt for 6 months and had not yet figured out how to address what he was seeing, was Officer Gavin Mercer, 26 years old, 6 months out of the academy, idealistic in the way that the job had not yet fully ground down. Mercer had his body camera active. He always kept his body camera active, partly because the training manual said to, and partly because something in the back of his mind had begun suggesting that there might come a day when the footage would matter. Lights out, no sirens, Pruitt had said when the call came through, already putting the cruiser in drive. We go quiet. Guy like this sees a light bar from down the block, he bolts or he shoots. We don't give him the option. Should we call for backup to establish a perimeter first? Mercer had asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Protocol says move, Pruitt said. They parked 2 blocks away and walked. They stacked at the front door of 14 Briarwood Lane at 4 minutes past midnight. Pruitt leading with his weapon already drawn. Mercer a step behind with his flashlight in his offhand and a feeling in his stomach that he would later describe to federal investigators as knowing something was terribly wrong and not knowing how to stop it. The house was dark. A single light glowed faintly from somewhere deeper inside, possibly a refrigerator light, possibly nothing at all. The front door was solid oak painted a deep navy blue, the kind of door that a person installs when they intend to stay somewhere for a long time. Pruitt tested the handle. Locked. Travis Mercer whispered, his voice tight. We don't have a warrant. We haven't confirmed exigent circumstances. We haven't announced ourselves. We're legally required to announce. He's armed, Pruitt said flatly, his eyes not moving from the door. We announce, we lose the element. We lose the element. One of us gets shot. You want to go home tonight or not? The exchange was captured in full audio on Mercer's body camera, which was running and had been running since they left the cruiser, including the moment 2 blocks back when Pruitt had reached up and manually pressed the standby button on his own chest unit. Pruitt stepped back from the door, raised his right boot, and delivered a front kick directly beside the deadbolt with everything he had. The frame splintered on the first impact, the lock tearing free of the wood, the door swinging violently inward and slamming against the interior wall with a sound that rolled through the quiet neighborhood like a thunderclap. Police. Get on the ground. Show me your hands right now. They flooded the room. Pruitt sweeping his weapon in wide arcs, flashlight throwing chaotic shadows across the bare walls and stacked cardboard boxes, Mercer a beat behind him, his own light finding the corners. And then Pruitt's beam landed on Marcus Webb, standing 8 feet away in the center of the room, hands already at shoulder height. Palms open, his face carrying the specific expression of a man who has been in worse rooms than this one and has come home from all of them. I live here, Marcus said. His voice was unhurried, resonant, and completely absent of the fear that Pruitt's entire approach was designed to manufacture. "This is my property. You are in my home without a warrant. I am not armed. I am the homeowner." Pruitt did not slow down. He closed the distance in 3 fast strides and shoved the barrel of his Glock to within inches of Marcus's face, a direct violation of every use of force protocol in the department's training manual, a tactic designed purely as physical intimidation, and said very quietly, "Get on the ground, boy." It was the word boy that Mercer would remember most clearly when he sat down with federal investigators 4 months later. Not the kicked door, not the lack of a warrant, not the disabled body camera. The word boy said in that particular tone, by that particular man, to that particular person standing calmly in his own home. What happened next took 1.7 seconds. Pruitt had crossed within arm's reach, and in close quarters combat, a firearm within arm's reach belongs to whoever has the superior skill set, and Marcus Webb had spent 13 years developing his in environments that Dale Pruitt could not have survived for 20 minutes. Marcus's left hand rose in a precise arc, the edge of his palm striking the slide of the Glock and redirecting the barrel outward away from his center line. In the same motion, his right hand found Pruitt's wrist in a grip that used the officer's own forward momentum against him, rotating the joint to its mechanical limit in a fraction of a second. Pruitt's fingers opened involuntarily. The Glock dropped, and Marcus caught it, left-handed, before it hit the floor, his thumb finding the magazine release by muscle memory, the magazine dropping free. His right hand racking the slide and catching the chambered round out of the air, all in a single fluid continuation of the same movement. Pruitt was already falling. Marcus had swept his lead leg at the ankle with a precision that used almost no force, and the larger man went down hard and flat, all the air leaving his lungs at once. Marcus dropped his knee into the center of Pruitt's back with enough pressure to hold him completely immobile, and none of the pressure it would have taken to cause permanent injury. The cleared Glock rested on a cardboard box. The chambered round sat beside it. Mercer had not moved. His brain was still attempting to parse what his eyes had just transmitted to it. "Lower your weapon," Marcus said to Mercer without raising his voice. "Put the safety on. Set it down on the box next to yours. Then step back 3 paces and don't move." Mercer lowered his weapon. He set it on the box. He stepped back 3 paces. "Good," Marcus said. "Now we wait for your supervisor." The living room settled into a silence that none of its 4 occupants would forget. Marcus steady on the arm of his camping chair, the 2 cleared service weapons arranged neatly on the cardboard box beside his bourbon glass. Mercer standing against the far wall, looking like a man reviewing the major decisions of his life. And Pruitt on the floor, breathing hard through his nose, his cheek against the hardwood. "You are done," Pruitt said, his voice tight with a fury that had nowhere useful to go. "You hear me? Assaulting a police officer. You just threw your entire life away. You are going to prison, and I am going to personally make sure. You're going to be quiet now," Marcus said without heat and without emphasis, in the tone of a man giving a weather report. "You've said enough." He reached down and unclipped the radio from Pruitt's shoulder strap without adjusting the knee pressure that was holding the officer to the floor. He keyed the mic and spoke to dispatch with the unhurried precision of someone filing a routine status report. His address, his name, a request for a shift supervisor, no lights and no sirens, and a specific note that the supervisor should be someone familiar with reading military identification. He set the radio down and picked up his bourbon. The neighborhood outside was beginning to stir in the peripheral way that neighborhoods stir when something has shattered the quiet, a light on in an upstairs window across the street, the distant sound of a dog that had been startled awake. From where he stood, Mercer could see through the broken front doorway to the house across the street, where the silhouette of a woman was visible at a ground floor window watching. He thought about the drive over. He thought about the word Pruitt had used. He thought about his body camera, which was still running, and about Pruitt's camera, which had been switched off from the chest unit on the walk over, a habit Mercer had observed 4 times in 6 months, and had told himself each time he would report, and had not. Headlights appeared at the end of Briarwood Lane, moving slowly, a single vehicle. Marcus watched the lights approach without changing his expression. His posture on the arm of the camping chair was the posture of a man who had already decided how the next several hours were going to go and was simply waiting for the other participants to catch up. "Here we go," he said to no one in particular. Sergeant Frank Dooley had been with Clover County for 21 years, and he had survived that long by being very good at one specific thing, arriving at a scene, reading the political temperature, and making whatever the official version of events needed to be slightly more defensible than the actual version. He was 52 years old and had the look of a man who had been making uncomfortable compromises for long enough that he'd stopped noticing the discomfort. He came through the splintered doorway of 14 Briarwood Lane with 2 additional deputies flanking him and his weapon drawn, taking in the scene in pieces that didn't immediately add up to anything his experience had prepared him for. His senior officer on the floor, a black man in a gray t-shirt, sitting on what appeared to be a camping chair, and 2 disassembled service-issue Glocks arranged on a cardboard box like items at a yard sale. "Hands on your head." Dooley ordered Marcus his weapon up. "Do it now." Marcus raised his hands slowly, interlaced his fingers behind his head, and said in a perfectly conversational tone, "My wallet is on the kitchen island. Sergeant, through the door on your left. I'd recommend you look at it before you make any arrests." Dooley nodded to the deputy on his left. "Go get it without lowering his weapon." The deputy returned 30 seconds later and handed Dooley a worn brown leather wallet without comment. Dooley took it, left-handed, flipped it open with his thumb, and looked at the primary ID in the front window. It was not a driver's license. It was a Department of Defense identification card with a green border, the specific border color used for retired service members, and in the fields beneath the photograph, Webb Marcus A. Commander, U.S. Army Special Forces, status retired. Behind the ID, half slipped from a card pocket, was a heavy metal challenge coin bearing the crest and motto of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Dooley had been a cop for 21 years. He knew what that coin meant, even if he'd never seen one in person. Most people hadn't. He looked at the 2 cleared weapons on the cardboard box. He looked at Pruitt on the floor, his wrist cradled against his chest. He did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was catastrophic. Dooley Pruitt said from the floor, his voice climbing. "Arrest him. He assaulted me. He disarmed me." "He's Pruitt," Dooley said very quietly. "Stop talking." He holstered his weapon. He told the 2 deputies to stand down. Marcus unfolded himself from the camping chair and retrieved his phone from the jacket draped over a moving box nearby. He looked at Dooley with an expression that was not hostile and not warm, simply direct, the gaze of a man who has decided what needs to happen next and is proceeding accordingly. "I'm going to make a phone call," Sergeant Marcus said. "I'd suggest you stay right where you are and listen, because the people I'm calling are going to want to know your name." He dialed. The other line picked up on the second ring. Sam, Marcus said. "It's Marcus. I'm sorry to call this late. I've had a situation at the New House Local Department, 2 officers, unlawful entry, use of force, yes. I need you to wake up the people you know at the Civil Rights Division. All of them, tonight." Dooley felt the blood leave his face in a single cold wave. Across the room, Gavin Mercer quietly reached up and made sure his body camera's red indicator light was still blinking. It was. 43 minutes after Marcus ended his call with Brigadier General Samuel Okafor, the character of Briarwood Lane transformed from a quiet suburban street into something that looked considerably more like a federal crime scene. 3 unmarked black Chevrolet Suburbans arrived first, moving at a pace that suggested the people inside them had been in a hurry since the phone rang. They parked in a tight formation in front of number 14, and the men and women who stepped out of them were wearing dark windbreakers with letters across the back that made Sergeant Dooley's stomach drop through the floor, FBI on 2 of them, DOJ Civil Rights Division on the 3rd. They moved past the deputy Dooley had posted at the perimeter without slowing or speaking to him. Behind the Suburbans came a silver sedan, driven with the calm precision of someone accustomed to arriving at difficult places and being the most composed person in the room. The woman who stepped out of it was Victoria Hale, the Regional Director of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, 51 years old, Yale Law, 2 previously dismantled, corrupt police departments on her professional record, and a reputation in federal legal circles as someone who did not fly to scenes she wasn't planning to finish. General Okafor had not simply called the Attorney General. He had activated a network of relationships that Marcus had spent 22 years building without ever anticipating he would need them for something like this. And the network had responded with a speed that told its own story about how seriously the people on the other end of those calls took what had happened in this living room tonight. Special Agent Renee Carter led the FBI field team through the broken doorway, took in the scene without visible reaction, and holstered her own weapon before she spoke. She addressed Marcus first, and she addressed him the way you address someone whose credentials you have already looked up and whose time you respect. Commander Webb Carter said. Agent Carter, FBI. General Okafor briefed me on the way over. Are you injured? No, Marcus said. Good. She turned to face Dooley and the remaining deputies with the kind of controlled authority that doesn't need volume to communicate itself. Sergeant, I'm formally invoking federal jurisdiction over this scene under Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under color of law. I need your officers to step outside and surrender their service weapons and body cameras to my agents. That includes the cameras that are currently active and any cameras that were deactivated prior to the approach. Dooley opened his mouth. The cameras that were deactivated before the approach, Carter repeated without adjusting her tone at all. Dooley closed his mouth. Pruitt, who had gotten to his feet and was standing with his cuffed wrists in front of him, turned on Mercer with a sudden savage focus. You left your camera on, Pruitt, said the words coming out low and precise. You left it on the whole time. Yes, Mercer said. I did. 2 FBI agents stepped between them. Mercer surrendered his body camera to Agent Carter and then did something he had been building toward for 6 months. He told her, standing in the living room of a house he had helped break into 45 minutes ago, that he had additional information about Officer Pruitt's equipment practices, his off-the-books storage habits, and a pattern of behavior on previous calls that Mercer had witnessed and not reported, and that he would like to speak with someone about a formal cooperation agreement. Carter looked at him for a moment. We'll get you set up with an attorney tonight, she said. Victoria Hale crossed the room to where Marcus was standing and spoke to him quietly, directly, the way 2 people speak when they are both done with the theater of the situation and want to get to the substance of it. She confirmed that a federal preliminary inquiry would begin by morning. She confirmed the 911 audio would be subpoenaed before sunrise. She confirmed that Carolyn Marsh's name was already in the initial incident report. I don't want a settlement with a non-disclosure clause, Marcus told her. I know, Victoria Hale said. Neither do we. At 9:17 the following morning, Carolyn Marsh was in her front garden with a cup of coffee and her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, deadheading the roses along the front fence with the meditative focus of a woman who has already decided how a situation ended and has moved on to other things. She had expected the house across the street to be quiet today. The man taken away, the problem resolved, the street returned to itself. Instead, 14 Briarwood Lane had a federal crime scene designation. 2 news vans parked at the corner and enough unmarked government vehicles in the driveway to suggest that whatever she had set in motion the night before had not concluded in the direction she'd imagined. She was still processing this when a dark blue sedan pulled slowly into her own driveway and a man in a gray suit and lanyard got out, walked up her garden path with the unhurried manner of someone who does this regularly, and held out a thick manila envelope. Carolyn Marsh. Yes, you've been served. Carolyn took the envelope with the automatic reflex of someone who had not yet understood what it was. She opened the flap, slid out the first page, and pushed her reading glasses down from her hair to her nose. The plaintiff's name was Marcus Webb. The law firm representing him, Graves and Associates, was one she had heard of distantly and unpleasantly in connection with civil rights litigation that had reshaped police departments in 2 neighboring states. The causes of action were filing a false police report, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages sought were a number that she read twice and then read a third time as if repetition might change it. Her coffee mug hit the stone path and cracked cleanly in half. An hour later, her attorney called. The FBI had already subpoenaed her phone records. Not just her 911 call, her phone records, which included the Sycamore Ridge Watch group chat, which included a message she had sent 14 minutes before calling 911. They finally sold the Miller place. You won't believe who moved in. I'm calling it in right now. And a second message 3 weeks earlier to the same group. Does anyone know who the developer sold to? I really hope this block doesn't change. And a complaint she had filed with the HOA 6 months prior, expressing concern about the property sale to an unknown buyer, which the HOA had dismissed as without basis. Carolyn sat down on the garden step where her coffee mug had been. The roses needed deadheading. She didn't move. By 9 o'clock that same morning, the Clover County Sheriff's Department had the specific atmosphere of a building that knows it is about to be taken apart and is trying to decide which wall to start with. Sheriff Gary Cobb was 58 years old and had been running this department the way his predecessor had run it, which was the way his predecessor's predecessor had run it as a machine, designed first to make the people with the most political influence feel safe and served, and second to handle everything else, however seemed most efficient, with efficiency defined generously. He was not a cruel man, particularly in the way that Pruitt was cruel. He was a man who had learned that looking away from certain things was the price of certain other things, and who had paid that price for long enough that he'd stopped thinking of it as a price at all. This morning he was in his office with his personal attorney, the department's union representative, a compact, loud man named Buddy Sykes, who was currently making arguments that were becoming less persuasive by the minute, and a growing awareness that the DOJ vehicles in the parking lot were not going away. Qualified immunity, Sykes was saying his hand flat on Cobb's desk. Exigent circumstances based on the 911 dispatch. The man was flagged as armed and dangerous. Pruitt acted on the information he had. We argue good faith. The man was flagged as armed by a neighbor who told the dispatcher he forced his way in when he didn't. Cobb's attorney said without looking up from the document she was reviewing. He was flagged as dangerous because he was large and black and carrying a bag. There was no forced entry, no weapon, no threat, and Pruitt's body camera was manually disabled before the approach, which is in direct violation of the department's written use of force policy, which is on record at the DOJ right now. Sykes went quiet for a moment. The document that Cobb's attorney was most concerned about, the one she had not yet told Sykes about, was Pruitt's internal affairs file, which the DOJ had formally requested at 7:15 that morning. 19 complaints across 14 years. 17 of the 19 involved Black or Latino men. Every single one had been cleared by Captain Roy Still's internal review process, a process that Cobb had approved the structure of and never once audited. Cobb called Stills into the office 20 minutes later and closed the door. The conversation was brief and terrible. Stills was 61 years old and had been clearing Pruitt's complaints for a decade because Pruitt's arrest numbers looked good in the annual report and because Stills had a specific philosophy about what the department's job was and who the department's job was for. He had never considered that the paper trail of those clearances, the review board compositions, the dismissal rationales, the complaint log, cross-referenced against the review outcomes, would be sitting in a federal office by 8 a.m. on a Wednesday. Stills left Cobb's office looking like a man who has just been told his x-rays came back and the news is not good. Cobb called the union back in and told Sykes that Pruitt was not to take a voluntary surrender and was not to accept a plea deal under any circumstances, that they were going to fight this through the trial process and let a jury sort it out. It was, his attorney would later note in her own private records, the worst decision Gary Cobb made in a morning full of them. The conference room on the 14th floor of the Graves and Associates building was the kind of room designed to make people feel that the truth is not only inevitable but already known. High ceilings, a long mahogany table, windows that looked out over the city at an angle that subtly communicated the height from which the people sitting on the attorney's side of the table tended to operate. Carolyn Marsh arrived with her attorney, a competent local litigator named Raymond Holst, who had primarily done real estate law for 20 years and was visibly outclassed by the room before he sat down in the practiced composure of a woman who had spent the past 3 months rehearsing the narrative of genuine innocent civic concern. Leonard Graves. Marcus's civil attorney was 64 years old, had been practicing civil rights law for 37 of those years, and had the unhurried manner of someone who has heard every version of a story before and knows exactly which document is going to end the performance. He began with the routine warm-up questions. Name, address, length of residence, relationship to the neighborhood, and then moved to the evening of the call with the methodical pace of a man laying stepping stones across a river, one at a time, each one solid before he placed the next. Mrs. Marsh, you've stated that you believed a burglary was in progress because the house had been vacant and because the man you observed arrived at a late hour carrying a large bag. Is that an accurate summary of your concern? Yes, Carolyn said. That's exactly right. Any reasonable person would have been worried. And yet in your 911 call, you told the dispatcher that the man appeared to force his way in and that he might be armed. Graves slid the call transcript across the table. Did you observe him force the door? The door opened very suddenly. And did you observe him force the door? Mrs. Marsh, a pause. No. Did you observe a weapon of any kind? No, but the bag. Did you observe a weapon? No. Graves let that sit for a moment, then reached into the nearest document box and produced the Sycamore Ridge Watch group chat transcript, bound and tabbed. He slid it across the table and opened it to the flagged page. I'd like to direct your attention to a message sent from your phone number to this group at 11:34 p.m. on the night in question, 14 minutes before your 911 call. You are the administrator of this group. This message reads, "They finally sold the Miller place. You won't believe who moved in. I'm calling it in right now." Could you tell me what you meant by who moved in? Holst raised an objection. Graves cited precedent, and the judge overruled it before Holst finished the sentence. Carolyn's composure did not collapse in one moment. It came apart in the careful way that things come apart when they were never as solid as they appeared, a slight tightening around her eyes, a longer pause before each answer, a shift in her posture from rehearsed confidence to something more effortful. Graves produced a second message from 3 weeks prior. Does anyone know who the developer sold to? I really hope this block doesn't change. He produced the HOA complaint. He produced Carolyn's 2 previous calls to the listing real estate agent asking about the buyer's identity. He laid them on the table in sequence like a hand of cards, and then he looked at Carolyn Marsh across the mahogany expanse and asked the final question in a voice so quiet and so absent of aggression that it landed harder than anything else in the room that day. Mrs. Marsh, is it possible that what you were afraid of that night wasn't a burglar at all, but simply a black man who could afford to live across the street from you? Raymond. Holst started to object. He stopped. There was no objection that helped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Gavin Mercer had been on administrative leave for 11 weeks when he finally walked into the federal building with his attorney and asked to speak to someone from the Civil Rights Division. He was 26 years old and looked considerably older the way people look when they have spent 11 weeks inside their own heads replaying a sequence of events and trying to find the place where they could have done something differently, and finding instead that they knew the right thing all along and simply hadn't found the courage for it in time. He sat across from Agent Renee Carter and Victoria Hale in a room that was deliberately and mercifully neutral. No one-way glass. No dramatic lighting, just a table and 4 chairs, and a recording device that Mercer's attorney had already reviewed, and he began talking. He talked about the storage unit first because it was the most concrete thing and because it was what his attorney had advised him to lead with. Pruitt had a rented unit about 40 minutes south of Clover County, registered under his wife's maiden name that Pruitt had mentioned once during a particularly unguarded moment after a department barbecue, calling it his pension plan. Mercer had thought it was a joke about retirement savings. It had not been a joke about retirement savings. The unit, Mercer explained, contained, to the best of his knowledge, from that one conversation, cash that Pruitt had described as being skimmed from forfeitures that the paperwork didn't need to reflect 2 handguns that were not department issued and not registered to Pruitt, and a portable hard drive that Pruitt had called his insurance, which contained unedited body camera footage from previous incidents, footage that had been officially deleted from department records, but that Pruitt had preserved as leverage against Captain Stills and Mercer believed against Sheriff Cobb himself. "He told you this," Carter said. "He told me enough of it," Mercer said. After the barbecue, he'd had a few drinks. He said, "Nobody comes after me, Gavin, because everybody has more to lose from me talking than from me staying quiet." He thought it was funny. Carter made a note. The FBI executed a search warrant on the storage unit at 6:40 the following morning. The cash was there. The 2 unregistered handguns were there. The hard drive was there, and the footage on it was extensive. 12 incidents across 8 years, all involving force, all involving men whose subsequent complaints had been cleared by Stills's review board, all now in the custody of the federal government. Victoria Hale drafted the arrest warrants for Captain Roy Stills and Sheriff Gary Cobb before noon, conspiracy against rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241, obstruction of justice and evidence tampering, and submitted them to the federal duty judge for signature. The machine that had protected Dale Pruitt for 14 years was about to be taken apart from the inside by the youngest and most frightened person in it, and it was going to be taken apart thoroughly. Captain Roy Stills was in his driveway at 6:15 on a Thursday morning carrying a travel mug toward his car when 4 federal agents came around both corners of the house simultaneously. His wife watched from the kitchen window in her bathrobe. He did not resist. He set the travel mug down on the car's roof with a care that suggested he was very focused on doing something ordinary while his world ended, and he put his hands behind his back. Sheriff Gary Cobb had known the warrant was coming. His attorney had received a courtesy call the night before, and he surrendered voluntarily at the federal building at 8 a.m. Accompanied by his lawyer, wearing a suit, he had clearly chosen with some care, as if presentation at the moment of his own arrest was a thing he could still control. 2 local television news crews were waiting on the sidewalk outside the federal building when Cobb arrived. They had been tipped off by someone, though the source was never officially identified. The footage Cobb walking through the main entrance with his attorney, the federal agents flanking him, the door closing, aired on every regional broadcast by 7:45 a.m. and was picked up by national outlets before 9. The DOJ instituted a federal consent decree over the Clover County Sheriff's Department by the end of that same week, effective immediately stripping the county government of its operational control over the department, installing a federal monitor with authority over all hiring decisions, all use of force policy, all disciplinary proceedings, and all internal affairs review processes. The monitor's first act was to request the complete personnel file of every officer with more than 2 use-of-force complaints in the past 7 years. It was a very long list. Dale Pruitt watched the coverage of Cobb's surrender from the living room of his house, where he had been confined under the conditions of his pretrial release. He watched Stills's arrest footage on the same channel, then the DOJ consent decree announcement, then a legal analyst on a cable news program explaining what federal conspiracy charges typically meant for plea negotiations. Pruitt's union representative had called him that afternoon. The union was withdrawing its financial support for his legal defense, citing a clause in the representation agreement related to conduct that demonstrated a disqualifying pattern of willful misconduct. The right-wing legal defense fund that had initially offered to cover his trial costs had also gone quiet after Mercer's cooperation agreement became public record. Pruitt called his attorney and said he still wasn't taking a plea. His attorney told him carefully and precisely that going to trial meant the jury would see the storage unit footage, hear Mercer's testimony, review the full 19-complaint file, and listen to the body camera audio, including the word "boy" played at full volume in a federal courtroom. Pruitt said he still wasn't taking a plea. His attorney made a note of the conversation and began preparing for trial. Across the street at 14 Briarwood Lane, Marcus Webb had finished unpacking. His medals were in a custom oak case on the living room wall. Leon Price's flag was in a shadow box beside them. The new front door was solid mahogany, and it fit its frame precisely. The federal courthouse in the city center had the specific quality of gravity that federal courthouses tend to have when the case inside them matters. The high ceilings, the dense mahogany paneling, the echo of footsteps on marble floors that makes every entrance feel like a statement. On the morning that the trial of United States versus Dale Pruitt opened, the gallery filled before the bailiff had finished setting out the water pitchers, and the overflow crowd in the corridor outside made the building feel like it was under a different kind of pressure than usual. The case had drawn people from places that don't typically send people to watch trials in person: civil rights attorneys from D.C., who had been following the Clover County Consent Decree veterans advocacy groups who had read about Marcus Webb's service record in the coverage of his civil suit, and a handful of men and women whose names appeared in Pruitt's complaint history, people who had filed reports that were then buried, and who had driven significant distances to sit in the gallery on the day that the machine which had buried them went on trial. Presiding from the bench was the Honorable Judge Sandra Osei, 60 years old, 22 years on the federal bench, and a reputation built on two qualities that made her particular courtroom a difficult place to perform in. She knew the law at a depth that made theatrical arguments look embarrassing by comparison, and she had no patience for anyone wasting her time with anything other than substance. Pruitt's defense attorney, retained late after the union and the legal defense fund withdrew, was competent enough to recognize the difficulty of what he'd been hired to do, and he built his opening around the tools available to him: the fog of nighttime decision-making, the legitimate 911 dispatch call, the weight of 14 years of service, and the genuine belief, he argued, that Pruitt had entered a building where an armed suspect might be waiting. He was a professional making the best of an extremely difficult brief. Pruitt took the stand in his own defense on the third day. He wore a dark suit that was slightly too formal for the setting in a way that read as effortful rather than authoritative. His posture on the stand was careful, the rehearsed uprightness of someone trying to convey confidence without appearing to perform it, and his voice, when he spoke, had lost the edge that his former colleagues would have recognized and had taken on something more measured, more modulated, the voice of a man who has been coached at length on the difference between those two things. He testified that he had responded to a legitimate armed burglary dispatch, that the house was dark when they arrived, that he had assessed the threat level as high based on the nature of the call, and that his decision to make entry without announcement was a split-second tactical judgment made in conditions of genuine fear for his own safety and his partners. He testified that Commander Webb had been standing in an aggressive posture, and that when Pruitt approached to secure the individual, Webb had executed a complex physical assault that disarmed him. He testified that he did not recall using the word his partner's body camera had captured him using. His attorney ended the direct examination cleanly, leaving the jury with the image of a frightened officer making imperfect decisions in a dark room with incomplete information. Then the courtroom screens came on. The footage from Mercer's body camera played in high definition, and without editing, from the moment they left the cruiser through the conversation where Pruitt told Mercer to move over his partner's explicit legal objection, through the moment Pruitt reached up and manually pressed his own camera to stand by, through the approach, through the kick that took the door off its frame, and then through the moment the flashlight beam found Marcus Webb standing in the center of his living room, hands already up his face, the face of someone waiting for something he had already anticipated. "I live here," "This is my property. You are in my home without a warrant." Marcus Webb's voice, calm, resonant, without a trace of fear or aggression, filled the federal courtroom and sat in the air above the gallery like a fact that had finally been allowed to take up its proper amount of space. DOJ prosecutor James Ellerby took the podium at 10:17 on the fourth morning of trial and arranged nothing on the surface in front of him. No notes, no documents, no binder tabs, and waited for the courtroom to finish settling before he spoke with the patience of a man who understands that silence used correctly is its own form of pressure. He was 53 years old, had been prosecuting federal civil rights cases for 26 of those years, and had a quality that Marcus had noticed from the gallery on the first day of trial. The quality of someone who is not performing conviction, but simply expressing it, which is a different thing entirely and considerably more effective in a courtroom. Mr. Pruitt Ellerby began, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room without effort. "You've testified that you disabled your body camera before the approach because, and I'm quoting from your testimony, it was standard personal practice in dynamic entry situations to minimize distraction. Is that correct?" "Yes," Pruitt said. Ellerby reached into the document box on the table beside the podium, a single deliberate reach, and produced a laminated copy of the Clover County Sheriff's Department Use of Force Policy, dated and signed by Sheriff Cobb. He walked it to the witness stand and set it in front of Pruitt. "Section 4, Paragraph 2. Mr. Pruitt, would you read it aloud for the jury, please?" Pruitt read it. His voice was controlled, but the jury could see his jaw working. The relevant line stated in direct and unambiguous language that body-worn cameras were required to remain active during all use-of-force incidents and all approaches where force was anticipated, with no exceptions for entry type or threat assessment. "Thank you," Ellerby said, retrieving the document. "Let's talk about the dispatch call. You testified that you assessed the threat level as high based on the nature of the dispatch armed suspect possible forced entry. My question is this: when you and Officer Mercer arrived at 14 Briarwood Lane, did you observe any evidence of a forced entry on the front door? The house was dark. Did you observe evidence of forced entry? On the door, before you kicked it? No. Did you hear sounds of violence or breaking glass from inside? No. Did you observe through any window or opening a weapon of any kind? No. You observed a dark house? Yes. Thank you." Ellerby paused. "Now, on the question of the word your partner's body camera captured you using when you advanced on Commander Webb, you testified on direct that you did not recall using it. I'd like to play that portion of the footage one more time at the jury's convenience." He nodded to the AV technician. The relevant clip played 12 seconds isolated, and the word landed in the courtroom the way it always lands when it is played in a room full of people who know exactly what it means and are being asked to sit with the meaning of it. Mr. Pruitt Ellerby said after a moment, "Do you recall it now?" Pruitt's hands, visible below the front edge of the witness box, were white at the knuckles. "I may have. Thank you." Ellerby went to the storage unit evidence next the cache, the 2 unregistered weapons, and the hard drive, whose contents had been played for the jury in an earlier session and had produced the kind of sustained, settling silence in the courtroom that indicates something has permanently shifted in the room's collective understanding of the situation. "Mr. Pruitt, the footage on this hard drive, footage you deleted from official records but preserved privately, covers 12 incidents across 8 years. Every one of those incidents resulted in a use-of-force complaint. Every complaint was cleared by Captain Stills's review board. Captain Stills, who has since pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges." Ellerby let that sentence reach every corner of the room before he continued. "You kept this footage as leverage. Not to protect yourself from false accusations, you could have filed it officially for that. You kept it as leverage to protect yourself from true ones." Pruitt's attorney objected. The objection was sustained. The jury had heard it. Ellerby moved to the podium's far edge, closer to the jury box, and he asked his final question without any theater at all, in the conversational tone of someone pointing out something obvious. "Mr. Pruitt, you've told this jury that you were afraid for your life that night. Commander Webb served 22 years in special operations. He disarmed you in under 2 seconds without causing you a single permanent injury using minimal force, and then he called your own department on your own radio and waited calmly for your supervisor to arrive. If that man had wanted you dead, truly wanted you dead, you would not be sitting in this courtroom. You would be a line in a report. So my question for you is simple. What exactly were you afraid of that night? Because it wasn't a weapon, and it wasn't a burglar. Was it the fact that a black man looked you in the eye and wasn't afraid of you? The defense attorney was on his feet. The objection was sustained. Judge Osei instructed the jury to disregard the question. Not one of them would. The jury was out for 2 hours and 41 minutes, long enough for the courthouse cafeteria to run out of coffee twice, not long enough for anyone in the gallery to have left the building. When the notification came that they had a verdict, the courtroom refilled in under 7 minutes. The foreperson, a woman in her mid-50s who had been a nurse for 30 years and had the bearing of someone accustomed to delivering difficult information with clarity and care, stood and read the verdict in a voice that did not waver. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law. Title 18 United States Code Section 242. Guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, guilty. On the charge of armed trespassing, guilty. Judge Sandra Osei did not adjourn for a separate sentencing hearing. The federal guidelines were clear. She had reviewed the pre-sentencing report thoroughly, and in her 22 years on the federal bench, she had learned that the mercy of a clean and immediate sentencing, the absence of the prolonged agony of waiting, was sometimes the most honest thing a judge could offer a courtroom that had already been through enough. She looked at Dale Pruitt for a long moment before she spoke, not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, but with the directness of someone who intends every word to count. Mr. Pruitt, you were given something rare and serious when you took your oath, the authority of the state, backed by the power to use force on your fellow citizens in the name of their safety. That authority is a profound trust. You did not treat it as a trust. You treated it as a permission slip, and you operated for 14 years on the assumption that the structures around you would continue to absorb the consequences of that. This court is one of the places where that assumption ends. The pattern documented in this proceeding was not impulsive. It was deliberate and sustained across more than a decade, protected by a network of institutional cover that has since been dismantled. The man whose home you invaded that night served this country with the highest distinction at the highest level. He fought for the rights you violated. The fact that he is alive and you are standing here, rather than the alternative, is entirely a function of his restraint and his professionalism, not yours. It is the sentence of this court that you be remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a period of 216 months, 18 years, to be served without the possibility of early parole and without placement in a minimum security facility. You will serve in the general population. The gavel came down once clean and final. Dale Pruitt stood very still. Then the federal marshals were beside him, the handcuffs were coming out, and the sound of the ratchet in the quiet courtroom was the most ordinary and complete sound anyone had heard all week. In the third row of the gallery on the aisle side, Marcus Webb watched Dale Pruitt led out through the side door. He sat for a moment after the door closed. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out the front of the courtroom without speaking to anyone. The civil jury returned its verdict in Marcus Webb's lawsuit against Carolyn Marsh on a gray Wednesday afternoon in early December, and the verdict was not close. Faced with Carolyn's own text messages, the ones to the Sycamore Ridge Watch Group, the 2 calls to the real estate agent, the HOA complaint, her attorney had been unable to construct a defense that survived contact with her own digital record. The jury awarded Marcus a significant sum in punitive and compensatory damages. the punitive portion calibrated specifically to the finding that her 911 call was not a mistake made in genuine fear, but a deliberate act carried out with knowledge of its likely consequences. Carolyn had spent the months since the deposition telling herself and anyone who would listen that she had simply been a concerned neighbor doing what the watch group was designed to do, that she couldn't have known who he was, that the outcome was never her intention. These things were all partially true, and none of them were the point. And on the day the civil verdict was read, she sat in the courtroom and understood in the specific way that you understand something when it has been reduced to a dollar figure and a judge's signature, that the gap between her intentions and her actions had cost someone something real and had cost herself something real in return. The liquidation of her retirement accounts began the following month. The house at 17 Briarwood Lane, the house she had spent 26 years tending, the house she had tried to protect, was foreclosed 9 months after the verdict, when the damages and attorney fees had depleted the last of her savings. She packed her remaining belongings into a rented truck on a cold morning and drove away from Sycamore Ridge Estates without saying goodbye to anyone, because there was no one left on the street who wanted to hear it. Captain Roy Stills was sentenced in a separate federal proceeding to 9 years conspiracy against rights and obstruction of justice. The judge noting specifically that Stills's review board conduct had not been passive negligence, but active participation in a cover-up sustained over a decade. He would be 69 years old when he was released, and he would never hold a law enforcement position again. Sheriff Gary Cobb received 6 years his relative cooperation during the investigation, credited against a longer potential sentence, the judge making clear that cooperation entered into only after the evidence was already in federal hands counted for less than cooperation entered into while the evidence could still be acted on. The consent decree over the Clover County Sheriff's Department remained in place with no projected end date. The federal monitor's first 2 years of work uncovering enough additional issues in hiring and disciplinary practices that the original projected timeline for restoration of local control had been quietly extended. Dale Pruitt arrived at his designated federal facility on a Tuesday in February. He was processed with the same bureaucratic efficiency extended to every incoming inmate paperwork classification, interview property surrender, assignment to a housing unit, and the heavy steel door of his cell slid shut behind him, with a sound that reverberated in a way that he would later recognize as the sound he was going to hear in the quiet moments for the rest of his time there. He lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling for a long time that first night, running the same calculation over and over. 14 years of complaints cleared a union that had told him he was protected. A captain and a sheriff who had given him every reason to believe that the structures around him were permanent and arriving each time at the same answer, which was that he had mistaken the tolerance of a corrupt institution for a guarantee, and that the guarantee had a shelf life he hadn't checked. The ceiling of the cell offered no revision to this conclusion. He was 46 years old. He had 18 years. 6 months after the trial, on a Saturday morning in early April, when the light had the particular quality of light that arrives in Virginia in spring, thin and honest, and not yet warm. Marcus Webb was sitting on the front porch of 14 Briarwood Lane in one of the 2 wooden chairs he'd bought at an estate sale the previous fall. He had a cup of coffee. He had a paperback open in his lap, though he hadn't read more than 2 pages in the past hour. The garden along the left side of the front walkway, tomatoes, peppers, a row of herbs he'd learned to grow from a YouTube tutorial and was quietly proud of, was just beginning to show the season's new growth along the edges of the beds. A man he'd spoken to briefly at the HOA meeting in March came by walking a beagle that moved with the cheerful purposefulness of a dog who knows exactly where it wants to go and is operating under the impression that the person on the other end of the leash shares this certainty. The man raised a hand. Marcus raised his back. He thought about Leon Price the way he thought about Leon most mornings, without grief's sharp edge, but with the steady low warmth of something that had become part of the way he moved through time rather than an interruption to it. He thought about what Leon would have said about all of this, the federal courtroom, the DOJ vehicles on the lawn, the fact that a retired Delta Force commander's primary tactical challenge in his first month of homeownership had been a neighborhood watch group chat. Leon would have laughed until he cried. He would have said, "Brother, we survived Kandahar, and you almost got taken out by a HOA newsletter." Marcus smiled, a real one small private for himself and Leon and nobody else. He picked up his coffee, leaned back in the chair, and listened to the morning, the birds, the beagle moving down the block, the sound of the neighborhood going about its Saturday. The front door of 14 Briarwood Lane was behind him, solid on its hinges, exactly where it was supposed to be. What Marcus Webb survived that night was not simply a violent encounter, it was the specific experience of coming home after more than 2 decades of serving his country at the highest possible level, buying a house in a quiet neighborhood, and being treated as a threat in his own living room by the very people whose job was to protect him. He had bled for the Constitution and then come home to have it violated by the men sworn to uphold it. But this story doesn't belong only to Marcus. Most of us have felt some version of what he felt, the experience of being prejudged before we've spoken of walking into a room and knowing that the conclusion has already been reached, of understanding that the system around you was not built with you in mind. The details change, the feeling doesn't. What makes stories like this one matter is not the extraordinary parts, the Delta Force training, the federal courtroom, the DOJ consent decree. It's the ordinary part at the center of it, a man who wanted to come home, sit in a quiet house, and be left alone. That should not have been too much to ask. If this story stayed with you, if there was a moment in it that made you want to say something, share something, or simply sit with it for a while, we'd love to hear what it was in the comments below. And if you believe, as we do, that no one is above the law and everyone deserves to come home safe, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next one.